I've had strange things happen to me for most of my life. Unexplainable things. But the strangest things happened at my last home. We built our home on a property that had a suicide committed on it. We often heard loud bangs and crashes that had no explanation. The doorbell would ring, and no one would be there. We had 40 acres, and it would have been impossible for anyone to be playing jokes on us. Water faucets would turn off and on, off and on. Strong cologne smells that would wake me in the middle of the night. My husband would still be at work, and no, I wasn't having an affair. People talking and laughing in our bedroom, only we couldn't see them. Light switches turning off by themselves. Loud heavy footsteps coming into my room, stopping and then leaving. Plants and lamps being turned upside down. My mother and her dog would come for a visit. Mom would feel a real presence in her room, and the dog would stand at the foot of the stairs, barking madly. I left the home 5 years ago, and it doesn't seem like whatever was there followed. I think my house is haunted. I was really terrified at one point, but after a year, I got so used to it. But for example, me and my boyfriend have heard footsteps up and down the hall outside our bedroom. Sometimes it sounds like someone is checking the doors and windows. And one night, me and my boyfriend had a fight, and I went to go stay at a friend's house. When my boyfriend came home, he sat on the sofa and started dozing off. When all of a sudden, there was a series of loud banging up and down the hall like someone was angry. He jumped up and came out the door and came to my boyfriend's to ask me to come home. Another strange time, my boyfriend came home for a few hours to take a nap. He called me at work. I was about 45 minutes away. We talked for a few minutes. After we hung up, he went into the bedroom to lay down when all of a sudden, again, it sounded like someone was putting dishes away and moving around. So my boyfriend says he thought to himself, oh, Ivy's home. After about a minute, he realized that it could have not been me because he just got off the phone with me and I was 45 minutes away. A lot of unexplained things have happened. Sometimes, when we've been in the house alone and sworn that we're not alone, even when we are alone, it feels like someone is watching us. We've been together in the house and feel like we are being watched. I don't feel afraid anymore, but now, we are moving out of this apartment, and it may sound even stranger, but you can almost feel a sad feeling, like whatever it is with us knows we're going and is sad. But I find myself feeling sad too. I don't think I need any help now, but I sure wish the help would have been there in 1974. We didn't know where to turn at the time. I thought you might be interested in what happened to us. The couple who rented the apartment to my daughter were 80 years old plus. We told them about the lights going out at different times, and they couldn't figure it out, so we never told them anything else. One time, my 2 daughters and my 2-year-old grandson were sitting on the floor, and way back in the kitchen, they suddenly started to hear a strange sound, and my grandson said, "Tiger, mommy, tiger." It was a growling sound. My grandson was scared and jumped up and made a beeline for the stairs. Then my daughters also jumped up, and they left the house for the night. Every other day or so, they would hear pots and pans filling out the cupboards, but when they would go look, nothing was out of order. It was a very nice apartment, very clean and pleasant looking. It was getting close to Christmas, and she decided to move. She couldn't take it anymore. It was just too scary. So I would go over in the daytime, and thinking nothing scary would happen in daylight, I went over to pack some things up while she was at class. I started to grab some things off the shelf, but I had a funny feeling that I didn't want to reach in the closet. All of a sudden, it sounded like 100 footsteps in there walking. So I ran out of there in a quick second as I could and refused to go back there by myself. From then on, we could go over at least 2 of us at a time. Then one of the last times I went over, I was standing, waiting for my grandson to finish in the bathroom, and as I was afraid to stand with my back to the hall for some reason, I kept thinking someone was going to touch me. Sure enough, I turned to ask my grandson if he had finished yet, and it felt like someone's hand had touched me on my left arm. I grabbed my grandson and ran to the front room with my family and told them what happened. So after that, we pretty much stayed together and worked together to move out of there. A friend of my daughter's knew the couple who had lived in that apartment before her, and they got in touch with the woman and told her what happened there. She wanted to meet with my daughter because she had some scary things happen to her. Her husband had drowned in the Maumee River in Toledo, Ohio, under suspicious circumstances. The police were never able to prove it, but he thought he might have been murdered. So his wife had a seance in the apartment where they lived, and she said she brought him there, and he told her he was murdered. She had a big insurance on him that he had taken out on himself, and when she went home from work at night, her house would be all messed up with things tossed all around. She had to move away but couldn't take it. Over these past 24 years, we've had some strange things happen, spiritual things and such. Seems to have settled down now, but I thought you would be interested to hear our story, and all that I've told you is true. There are no lies here. Let me know what you think. It's comforting to have someone tell this stuff to. A lot of people think you're nuts when you mention these things, so we pretty much keep it to ourselves. I'm interested to hear what you have to say about these things. Hi, I would like to tell you of some strange things that have happened to me. It started with a dream that would not leave me alone. It was about a house that was important to me for some reason. I dreamt of it over and over, seeing all of its different owners as they moved in and changed the house's layout, parties they had every day, things that were done there, etc. One early owner was an older female that did not like being there. I wondered about this house for years until I moved to my recent address and ran across the house on a drive. I was angry because they had moved my garden and replaced it with a pool. I was surprised by this feeling. Why did I feel angry about that? I decided to talk with the recent owners and tell them of the remodeling I'd seen and about the baby that was lost in the home early on. The owner was astonished that everything I said was true and explained to me the house was haunted. I was surprised at this and wondered who was haunting this place. Could it have been me? Was I haunting them while I was dreaming? Can this even happen? Why was I drawn to this house? I assure you, I never visited this house in real time and am in awe as to what this secret house holds for me. Could I be the woman who died in childbirth in this house over 100 years ago? Also, the woman who I spoke of earlier who did not want me in the house, she turned out to be the original owner's second wife. The first died in childbirth. Please write back with any insight you may have on this subject. I've not dreamt of the house since finding it. Thank you. I've experienced hauntings in almost every place I've ever lived in. That's probably because my mother never sees ghosts, but loves old-fashioned houses. The first house I grew up in was a single-level 2-bedroom with a basement. When you passed inside the front door, you came upon a hallway with 4 doors. First my parents' bedroom door, then the bathroom door, then the basement door, then the door to the bedroom that I shared with my brother. When I was little, I was always the first one awake. I would walk into the hallway to go to the bathroom. Once, I saw a carved wooden chair with big wheels, one on each side, sitting right outside my parents' bedroom. Normally, I would have lost no time in climbing all over this new piece of furniture, but this one, for no apparent reason, made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. I ran back into my room and slammed the door. Later that day, I asked my father to please get rid of the big wooden chair in the hallway. Thinking I was playing a game, he said there weren't any chairs in the hallway, but if he ever saw one, he'd be sure to move it. I didn't see the chair again for almost 6 years. When I saw it the next time, I was sitting in the exact same place as before. I was older now, but wasn't quite so afraid, so I came closer. The chair was battered and scarred this time. Part of the back corner had been broken off, and the seat was yellowed. It smelled like very old, musty leather. I still couldn't bring myself to actually touch the chair, but I managed to go to the bathroom anyway. While I was brushing my teeth, I heard a metallic crush in the basement. I figured my dad was downstairs trying to fix the furnace again. It was October after all, but that was odd, since I hadn't heard him go down there, but maybe he was up there before me. When I came back out, the chair was gone. I went to the fridge and poured myself some juice. My mother came into the kitchen in her nightrobe, and I asked her if Dad had gotten the furnace fixed yet. She said no, but he'd probably try once again. He got out of bed. I said he's already up. I heard him in the basement. She told me, "You mean that loud noise? I heard it too. It woke me up. Your dad's still in bed. Go downstairs. Maybe a stray got into the basement last night." And so, I went. The basement was very cold, colder than usual, even for an October morning. I searched the entire area. Not too difficult since it was just a big, concrete floor. Not much on it except for shelves of canned goods. But I didn't find any signs of an animal being there. No droppings, claw marks, paw prints, or jars of food broken. There was no animal smell either. I thought for a moment. The crash I heard was too loud to be just any animal, unless something had been knocked over, and everything appeared to be in its usual place. That wasn't the first time we had heard strange noises coming from the basement either. They normally happened around winter or late fall, and the noises always sound like metal clanking, like someone banging a shovel against a wall. The sounds would come at night or early morning, and one week, they got so bad that we had to move into the living room just to get some sleep. I didn't put two and two together until many years later, when I was a teenager. Mother finally told me a story of how they bought the house. It had been cheap to buy because a man had fallen to his death down the basement stairs a few years prior to Dad buying the place. The man was fairly wealthy and had the house built, 1 story high, to accommodate his special needs because he was in a wheelchair. I told my mother about the chair I'd seen in the hallway twice before. Chair with wheels. I was too little to have seen a wheelchair, and she told me what her next door neighbor had told her, that when the man had died, he was sitting in the hallway while the nurse ran a bathroom and the basement door opened, or had been left opened, who knows. The man was a miser, according to neighbors, and probably didn't want a draft coming into the house, so he wheeled himself over to shut the door. One of the wheels accidentally went over the edge, somehow, and the poor guy fell down the stairs and split his head open. There were still bloodstains at the bottom of the stairway. My brother and I always just assumed it was just red old paint. The nurse called out for him to come and take his bath, and heard him flailing around downstairs, trying to get back into his chair. Mom and Dad never told me or my brother. I guess they didn't want us to grow up nervous or jittery. The ghost, if that's what it was never really mean. I guess he just wanted his wheelchair back. I live in Spartansburg, South Carolina. I live fairly close to the Cowpens battlefield area. I'm going to tell you about one of the times I went there. A couple of weeks ago, I visited the battlefield for a picnic. It was weird from the start because, I swear, I could no longer find the visitor center. The asphalt roads had been replaced with dirt roads. In the clearing, where concerts are held, was all covered with trees and bushes. When I finally found my way to the area where the big cavalry battle was fought, I began to feel an eerie presence like I was being watched. I turned around to find a bush shaking furiously. From the bush, a big flash quickly followed by the sound of a loud bang erupted. I quickly turned to see who or what was shooting at. In the clearing, a good 50 yards away, a blue cavalry rider, surely American, stood with a traditional 17th century revolutionary uniform on, and before my eyes, he vanished into thin air. I've not been back since. The story I'm about to relay was told to me by a very reliable friend during my years in college. I had no reason to question the authenticity of his story, since I knew him to be a very level-headed man and was not given to ghost and goblin stories. It appears that his grandfather lived in an old home out in the lonely countryside of North Carolina during the 30s and 40s. He was a farmer by trade and a very religious man. He lived there some years alone, his wife having died of an unusual sickness. I had occasion to visit the area myself, and if you go to this area of North Carolina today, You will still find many cousins and aunts and uncles living very near one another. It was the same way during his grandfather's time where he lived there, very near to his son, my friend's father. In fact, the homes were only 2 miles apart and connected via a dark path that wound through a gloomy forest through which the relative often traveled on visits back and forth. It was always the goal to leave well before sunset. Lamp oil was a precious commodity before and during the war years, and one could not waste it on long trips in the dark. On this particular occasion, my friend's grandfather went to visit the relatives on the other side of the forest. It was Thanksgiving time, and the trees had shed most of their leaves going into winter, and there was a cold chill in the air. The family had a joyous time together feasting on turkey and all the trimmings. Grandfather was deeply engrossed in all the family time, and no one noticed the sun starting to dip low in the horizon. In fact, too low for the safe journey back through the forest. Even though the members of the family pleaded with him to stay the night, Grandfather shrugged them off. "I have to start out early tomorrow morning for town. My house is closer. I'll be all right." He departed just as the sun disappeared behind the horizon, and everything was bathed in the misty light of twilight. As I said before, Grandfather was a very religious man and wasn't in the least bit intimidated by ghosts and ghouls, so the trek back through the forest, although very dark without a lamp, didn't even cross his mind as being risky. It was a waning moon that evening and cloudy, so there was very little light, and under the eaves of the forest it was even darker. He told his grandson later that even though he knew the trail well, he found himself thrashing around in the underbush on several occasions. He even miscalculated the stream that crossed the path around halfway through the forest and got his feet soaking wet. It had rained through the night before, so the trail itself was muddy and his feet started getting heavy from the mud. It was at about this point in the trail that he felt something, as if something were following him. Never having been on the trail after dark, he explained it away as his imagination. Perhaps another 50 yards down the dark trail, as he recalled, he heard something behind him splash through the creek he had just crossed only moments before. I didn't know what to think of that. Maybe a deer or something that was just spooked down the trail by his passing, he later told his grandson. It sounded like he was in a big hurry, whatever it was. Perhaps it was the uncertainty derived from the extreme darkness. Maybe it was his imagination. But when he heard a twig snap no more than 20 yards behind him only seconds later, he knew it was time to make tracks. His grandfather was in his early 40s at the time and was in excellent physical condition, like many farmers from the years of working with their hands. From his estimation, he was only a half mile from home when he started running, more of a jog than anything, as he recalled. The mud made it tricky work, and his feet were pretty heavy with the thickness of mud clinging to them. But when he broke from the trees and saw the shadow of the house around 100 yards away, he heard whatever it was behind him give out a guttural growl, as if it were exerting itself by pouring on the stream for the final stretch. That was his cue to let loose with full-out run for his life, mud or no mud. He didn't look back, but he heard the beastly thing behind him chugging for air and crashing through the underbush as it too broke into the open. He then thought it might be a cougar or panther because of the snarl. He didn't turn around to find out. He made for the back door that was unlocked, and at full speed, dove through the door. The door crashed open at the force of his huge frame. He probably slammed it shut with his foot and quickly locked it. No sooner he had gotten to his feet and backed away from the door, perhaps 3-second time lapse, when something hit the door, the force of which shook the house. The center of the door bowed in, and he heard the hinges creak under the stress, but thankfully, as he was to recall later, it held solid. He quickly reached for his gun, and like many hardy folk of his era, leapt at the window just next to the door and aimed his shotgun out at nothing. There was nothing there. Immediately, he went around the house to make sure all the doors and windows were locked. Of course, they were all wide open, but nothing got in that he could find. It didn't rain that night, so the next morning, before he went to town, he went to check out the tracks of the great beast that chased him. To his surprise and dismay, he found none. Nothing to verify his story, that he didn't imagine it, only his word, which was significant since he grew up in an era where a man's word was totally his bond. He rarely told the story because he just figured it was a panther or maybe a bear. He did find it strange that between the time it took him to grab the shotgun and get to the window was less than a second and there was nothing there. He couldn't see anything racing off towards the forest in the decreasing light. What about footprints? Certainly, something that knocks down trees and crashes into doors with such force should leave tracks. To this day, it remains unexplained. From the time I was 4 until I was about 16, my grandparents lived in a house on Cloverdale Road that had a poltergeist in it. I lived with them for the first 4 years, then moved out with my mother, but even after we moved, I would spend weekends or holidays at my grandparents' house. The happenings were noticed by everyone in the family. My grandfather was the only one who never said anything was out of the ordinary. He's a staunch man of God and kept pictures of Jesus around, and he prayed daily to bless our house and everyone in it. The house had a sunroom that was added on the second floor. Over the front porch, this became my room. This wall between my bedroom and the master bedroom, where my mother slept, was brick and had 2 small windows on either side of the door. I had to walk through a room to get to the upstairs hall, where there was a door leading to the middle room. Always dark, because the only window was 2 feet from the house next door. In the back of the upstairs had a small kitchen over the top of the one on the first floor, and a bathroom at the very back over the top of my grandparents' room on the first floor. The downstairs had a living and dining room combination that was curtained off. The front room was a bedroom, the middle the dining room, and the stairs to the basement went down at the doorway to the kitchen. Beyond was my grandparents' room, as I mentioned. My grandparents, my mother, my aunts, and myself all lived there all at once. My aunts were teenagers and experimenting with the occult and spirit invocations. I really think this had to do a lot with everything. At their age, they could have understood the consequences of what they were asking. You could clearly hear the footsteps in the middle room, even during the day, and then find out later that my aunt wasn't home. So many things got moved around in Susan's middle room that she put a lock on her door, but it wasn't any of us. We heard walking, someone laying down heavily on the bed, drawers opening and closing, the closet opening and closing, not loud or frightening, just the normal noises Susan would make if she was there. Many times, when I was very young, I'd scamper up the stairs, convinced she was there, and wanting to play with her. When I got there, the door would be locked, and no one would answer me when I knocked. Once I even saw the light was on in her room. It was shining around the door. I called to her and tried to open it, but it went out and the noises stopped. My scalp would tingle with fear, and I'd run crying to my grandmother and tell what happened. Once, when I was about 5 or 6, I got up to the bathroom in the middle of the night. My room was awash with streetlight lamp, but my mother's, with no other windows, was very dark. I had to go slowly, even though I was dying to go into the bathroom, because I didn't want to crash into something and wake her up. When I got there, I was just flushing and was suddenly possessed, no pun intended, with the most abject horror for no apparent reason. I screamed and screamed and screamed. I ran all the way to the bathroom past my mother, who was struggling to get up, into my room and under my blankets. I was trembling and pale and shaking. It woke up the whole house, and it took me hours to calm down and sleep with the light on. I never knew what had set me off, just blind panic. Our pots and pans could be heard falling out of the cupboards, and when you go check, everything would be in place, except maybe one thing, and that would turn up days or weeks later. My mother saw a black shadow, about 2 to 3 feet high, at the foot of her bed when she'd wake up in the middle of the night. One day, it waited until she was awake, then slowly, deliberately came around the side of the bed and advanced towards her head. She prayed fervently while it just stayed there, then mysteriously it faded away. But it will always come back another night. She was the only one who saw anything. The rest of us just heard disturbances. I was playing with my toys one sunny day. In my room, I was about 7 at the time. I picked up a bunting bag, sort of like a baby sleeper, but like a gown sewed closed at the bottom instead of 2 legs, and also the ends of the sleeves are sewn closed, and it had a hood. It was made of flannel and had flowers on it. I loved putting my baby dolls in it. It fit like the ones that were about 12 inches high. I had a doll prepared to put in it, and reached for the flannel bag on the floor next to me. Then I shrieked and jumped up, flinging it away from me. I could feel like there was something, felt like a gardener snake or two, writhing inside of it and making a buzzing noise like the world's biggest housefly bee. I stared at it in horror as it laid on the floor, and the writhing could be seen. Then, the noise died down, and as it did so, the shapes quit swirling and went flat. I was screaming for help. My mother and aunt came upstairs, and I told them what happened. I was sobbing so hard they could barely understand me. They picked it up, even though I screamed and begged them not to, and looked inside. There was nothing. The only way out, if something was in there, was through the neck hole, and it was lying face up a couple of feet from me, and I had not taken my eyes off it for anything. They searched the room and found nothing. They said I imagined it, and took me downstairs to have juice to drink. I swear I never played with it ever again. I put that thing in the bottom of a box and left a pile of heavy toys on top of it. The house still stands, and when we all left, none of those things ever followed us. I wonder what else happened there over the last 20 years. My father died in Las Vegas in 1993, the youngest of his 5 children. I was the first one to make it out to Vegas for his funeral. He was cremated. I got there on a Wednesday. Thursday morning, one of my mother's friends came over to our house with some soda and other things for us. I ran out of the house to help her unload her car. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my father standing beside the house. He had his right hand on his hip and held his left hand in midair, as if he were going to take a pull off a cigarette. Ironic, because he died of lung cancer, or as if he wanted to wave at or beckon to me. It was only a few seconds, but a whole jumble of thoughts ran through my mind. He's going to say something to me. I don't want to hear it. So I looked away, and when I looked back, he was gone. I regret not stopping to hear what he wanted to say to me. My brother said he chose to say goodbye to me. This was the first time I've ever seen a ghost. I'm waiting to see my mother, who died in May 1998. A footnote: when I saw him, I noticed that my father was wearing his favorite khaki pants and gold and white striped shirt. That afternoon, I went to my father's office to work on the program for the memorial service. His boss gave me a picture of my father. In it, he was wearing that gold and white striped shirt. When I was growing up, I've had several experiences which led me to believe the house was haunted. The first, I was about 6 years old. I was laying in bed, just about to fall asleep, when I heard what I thought was laughing. I turned over to tell my sister to be quiet when I saw a black form floating beside my bed. My sister was sound asleep. This form had no legs that I could see. It did have a smile on what I call its face. The next encounter did not happen until I was 16. I was coming home late one night and came face to face with this thing. It was the same thing I saw when I was 6, only this time there was no smile. After an indiscernible amount of time, I ran to my room. I've had several encounters with this thing throughout my teen years and began calling it Paul. Don't ask me why, because I don't know myself. My sisters and brothers claim they have never saw it, but one brother says he has had haunting experiences, such as floating in his room. My mother says she knows the house was haunted, but she refused to give any examples. I know this thing was not harmful because nothing ever harmful ever happened. I also came to feel that this thing was protective of us because I never felt alone or afraid in the house when I was alone. Whenever something was going to happen, we were given warning signs such as popping noises on the stove that we found out had a gas leak and uneasy feelings using the garbage disposal that checked out to have a barbed wire that an electrician said could have caused a fire. This is my story. Hope it wasn't too long. I know it sounds incredibly terrifying just by the details I've given, but that black face was just so mysterious. But I didn't know what to think because I believed that he was actually trying to help me and protect us from anything possible. I guess at this point, it really doesn't matter what it looked like, as long as it was trying to help us, right? Thanks again for reading. I really appreciate you listening to this story, and I hope you have a good day. I used to bicycle the 4 miles to and from work, along the main roads connecting to two towns in a part of southern Japan. Along the way, there were rice fields on both sides of the roads, shops of many kinds, a school or two, and quite a number of houses set back only about 10 or 15 feet from the sidewalk. One evening in winter, around 7:30, I was bicycling towards home and passed by several homes in a row along the left side of the road. One of them was a one-story wooden farmhouse that had a long, low facade with several square beam columns holding up the roof over the entranceway. As I neared this house, I noticed that there was a boy of perhaps 10 years old standing behind one of the columns, partially obscured by it. He was clearly wearing shorts. It is not unusual for boys to wear shorts all year long in relatively warm southern Japan, and a long-sleeved t-shirt, and most notably, a red baseball cap. As I got nearer and passed in front of where the boy was standing, I spotted him again, this time just a few feet away from me, and I noticed that where his face should have been, there was just a blur, a somewhat dark flesh tone blur, but no visible features. This quite naturally shocked me, and just after I passed on my bicycle, I looked back over my shoulder at the place where he had been standing. He was no longer there, though there clearly was not enough time for him to have moved so quickly that I wouldn't have seen him. I had chills during the rest of my way back home. The next day, I told the people in my office what I had seen the night before, and one of the older, upper 50s women told me that a stretch of the road was notorious for fatal car accidents, most involving children who dart into the street after a ball or some other toy. I suppose that to most readers this sounds like a fairly typical ghost sighting story, but it is the only one I have personally seen. What I can only conclude was a ghost, so it had quite a deep impact on me. Though I worked at that same job for more than a year after the sighting, and bicycled to and from work along the same road almost every day during that time, I never again saw the boy in the red cap. Victorville, California George Air Force Base is deactivated now, but back when I was assigned there in the 70s, I lived next door to a haunted house in base housing. My wife and I lived in what were known as worry housing units. These were small concrete blocks duplexes that were 2 bedrooms that had swamp coolers for cooling in summer and natural gas wall heaters for the winter. We moved into our unit and found it agreeable for just the 2 of us. While talking to the neighbors, we found out that our unit and the next 3 units had to have the heaters replaced. The unit next to ours had malfunctioned, and the woman living there was asphyxiated. The next family to move in had a small boy, and he would wake up screaming every night. His mother asked him what was wrong, and he finally told her that the white lady kept coming into his room and saying, "I'm going to take you home with me." My wife had told her that I had experiences with that kind of thing, and volunteered me to go have a look. Naturally, I waited until it was full noon, before I went in to check out the house. Now at this time, we had a stupid cat. What other kind is there that will follow me around? So, in we go. Kitchen, okay. Dining room, okay. Living room, okay. Master bedroom, okay. Bathroom, okay. Kids' room. Uh-oh. No feeling cold or anything, but my eyes are drawn to the far corner of the room. I can't see anything there, but I know something is there. I glance down at the cat and it's looking in the same spot. Glance up. It has moved closer to me. Glance down. Cat is fluffing up and backing down the hallway. I figure the cat has the right idea. Now, here's where I made a stupid mistake. I got in front of the cat. I hear the cat make a loud hiss, and the next thing that happens is the cat went up my back and off the top of my head running. I don't stop to look behind me, remember what Satchel Paige said about that, and take off running. My wife said she heard the cat make a noise, and then me saying, "Oh crap," then a herd of elephants running out the door. Needless to say, I recommended our neighbor have the chaplain come out. A second episode after that really had the hair stand up, and still does to this day. I was coming home around 2 a.m. and noticed the master bedroom window was open and the light was on. I glanced over, and there was the gal next door, brushing her blonde hair, and not wearing a stitch. Well, good neighbor that I am, I call out to her to close the blind at least. First word out of my mouth, Lights off, blind closed, window shut. I don't to this day know how I got through the front patio gate or the front door. I woke up my wife and told her what I'd seen. She said 1. Our neighbor's hair is brown. 2. They were in San Francisco. And 3. The woman who died in the house was a blonde. I went to Blackburn College in Carlinville, Illinois. Before I moved into my dorm room, people asked which dorm I was assigned. When I told them Stoddard, everyone told me to watch out for the ghost, and I believe it was room 305. Blackburn is a very old school, and Stoddard was one of the oldest dorms dating back to the 1800s. The supposed haunted room was the only single room. The rest were doubles. It was on the 3rd floor, as the 3rd floor was all guys and the first 2 all girls. The story goes, a freshman hung himself in that room years ago, or another one was that a boyfriend killed his girlfriend and then himself there. Anyways, you were supposed to be able to hear them walking around at night and see them in windows and such. My room was diagonal from this room. My only encounters there were sometimes in the middle of the night. If I walked down the hall to the bathroom, I could swear someone was outside the stall walking around, but there would be nothing there. Also, I would leave stuff in my room, and when I came back, it would be gone, and then later return to the same spot. I transferred schools the next semester for personal reasons, but the weird thing is, the guy who lived next door to me there always said how he could see the ghost, and then I got word that he tried hanging himself last semester. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. In 1992, I was a full-time student at Columbus State Community College, earning an associate's degree in law enforcement. I had to earn a full-time salary as well, so I took a job as a security officer during 3rd shift at American Electric Power Lab in Groveport. It was a facility set out in a rural area, and, with the understanding that I would be the only one in the building during the graveyard shift, figured it would give me time to study. I will try to make this as short as possible. My first few weeks there were rather strange, as I kept seeing the presence of a shadowy figure of a man walking very fast out of the corner of my eye. I really did not consider it a haunting or ghost, because I never saw the apparition head on, so I just went on about my business and really did not give it much thought. However, I became very uneasy and spooked during the midnight and early morning hours. One morning, at about 6 a.m., I happened to be looking in the direction of the same window blinds while I was sitting in the lobby area. The window separated the lobby and the work area. Just then, I saw the definite figure of a man walk by the blinds. I got up and, thinking it was an employee who had gotten in early, went to investigate the area. There was no one there at all. The cleaning crew then related the story in which they were seeing a ghost in the building. They described the same type of apparition to me. I never told them about my experience. While training new officers, I had some who would stop in their tracks while I was showing them the building. I would ask them what was wrong, and they would be looking towards a room or hallway and tell me something like, "I thought I saw someone walk by." This happened more than once. I spoke with the guy who used to manage the security division, and he told me he had an officer leave in the middle of the night because he saw the shadowy figure of a man walking very quickly around the perimeter of the security fence. I told an employee at the building, whom I had gotten to know over the time I'd worked there, about the sightings. Almost immediately he said, "Oh, that must be Roger." He was very serious. He said that Roger died about 8 years prior, but that he loved his job, and that was probably him. Indeed, there was a former employee named Roger that died 8 years ago. Without going on and on, I will just say that many other security officers had reported the same types of activity. I quit the job back in June of 1993. I worked there almost 2 years. I would like to contact some officers working there now and see if the haunting is still going on. It was a cold winter's day. The year was 1991, and I thought it was a very typical day. Matthew, the little boy that I care for, was taking an afternoon nap. As usual, I was cleaning up the kitchen, then gathered up all Matt's dirty clothes and put up a wash. It was around 3:30 in the afternoon when I heard Matt screaming. I could hear his voice very clearly from the baby monitor that was on the kitchen counter. I called to him so that he wouldn't get scared as I walked upstairs to his bedroom. That's when it hit me first. On the way up to the staircase, I was chilled. I ran back down, got my sweater, then ran back upstairs to Matt's room. Well, that's where the coldness came from. Sure enough, as I opened the door, that's where all the cold air was coming from. It was freezing in the baby's room. I walked over to his bed, pulled the railing down, and held him in my arms. His hands were ice cold, and he was shaking and crying. In an effort to calm him down, I held him in my arms, and I tried rocking him back and forth. He finally had quieted down, so I began to change his clothes, and that's when I noticed my tape recorder on his dresser. I'd forgotten all about that. You see, Matt's family was relocating to another state soon, and I knew that I wanted something of Matt's to remember him by. So, that morning I brought my tape recorder with me to have a tape recording of him. Little did I know that was all on the tape. When I got home, I never did listen to the tape. It was Friday, so I thought to myself that I had the whole weekend to listen to it. On Sunday, I had some free time, so I started to listen to the tape. In the beginning I thought, well, I did it. I finally have Matthew's voice on tape, and was so happy to know that I have something to remember him by. As I began to listen, I heard our voices, Matt's, mine, and something that I couldn't make out. I kept backing up the tape because I heard something so strange that I couldn't even make out what I was hearing, but it sounded so eerie that it gave me the chills. What could this be? Did I have a faulty tape here or what? As I kept rewinding and listening, the more clearer it became. It was definitely a voice saying pull the gate up, but what kind of voice was it? It sounded ghostly, but how can this be? I heard nothing that particular day, only Matt and myself. There was no one else there, just the two of us. As I kept listening, I became more frightened. I heard the same voice saying, I wish you were dead. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I never heard of anything like this before. I thought to myself, you're just imagining all of this. You're going crazy. But it was true. The tape doesn't lie. It had to be a ghost or something else. I had no other explanation. It just had to be. After a few hours, I decided to let my daughter listen to the tape. Now, my daughter is a very religious person. She has many religious friends and even knows a couple of Catholic priests personally. After she heard the tape, she told me that she would contact a priest right away. The next day, we called a Catholic priest that we both knew very well and made an appointment with him for the next night. Since the priest knew about the tape already, when we arrived there, we went right into his office. The three of us sat down and he listened to the tape right away. Well, it only took him one time to listen to it. He already knew what happened. He looked at me and he asked me if the family was Catholic, and I answered yes. Then he asked if there was anything religious in the home. I said no, and then asked him why. Then he began to explain that the family had no protection in the home. It was at this time that I understood what he was talking about. He was very concerned for the baby's welfare. He said that what he heard on the tape was evil voices and other things that I didn't even hear. Certain sounds of doors slamming and some creaking floors. He told me to tape Matt's room again, and if it happened again, that I should tell the parents. But what should I have told them? That Matt's room was haunted, or the whole house was haunted? I didn't know what to do. If I told the parents the whole story, would they think I was nuts? So, I decided to take this to a doctor friend of mine. He happens to be a psychiatrist, and also dabbles a little into strange and unexplainable things. When I went to see the doctor, I told him the whole story thus far. Then he listened to the tape. His exact words were, "The voice is not from this world. It's from another dimension that is not a human voice." Well, from then on until this day, from a priest to a doctor, this tape has been a mystery to me. So, I've decided to take my tape and my story to any parapsychologist or website that has to do with the paranormal and let the experts decide for themselves. What in the world happened to Matthew's room that cold winter day in 1991? I'm finally ready to hear what they have to say, aren't you? I lived in what I believed to be a haunted apartment for about a year. I cannot disclose the exact location due to the fact that the apartment is still rented to tenants. When I first moved in, everything seemed normal until I began doing some small renovations. My husband Eric began to pull up the carpet, and we noticed odd gouges in the floorboard that would be our bedroom. At the time, we thought that maybe some previous tenants had damaged the floor while moving their furniture, so we proceeded to paint the floor and lay down the rug. After 2 months or so, my husband walked into the bedroom after taking a shower. I was on the bed reading when suddenly, Eric slipped on the area rug that covered the gouges. After assuring that he was okay and passing it off as having wet feet, we turned in for the night. The next morning we noticed what appeared to be stains seeping through the area rug. They appeared to be the same pattern as the gouges. I picked up the carpet and noticed a slick substance sticking to the back of the carpet. After much arguing as to what exactly the substance was, we decided to just throw it away. We never gave it a second thought. About 3 or 4 days later, I was in the kitchen having a cup of coffee with my friend Alec when suddenly the room temperature dropped considerably. I asked him to make sure all the windows were shut. As he walked into the living room, he glanced into my bedroom on the right and noticed the curtains were blowing. He went in to make sure the window was closed, which it was. About 5 minutes later, we both heard a loud bang coming from the bathroom, which was on the other side of the living room. It took Alec and I a good 15 minutes to get the courage up to check the bathroom. The first thing you see when entering the bathroom is the tub. I opened the curtain and noticed 4 tiles on the back wall that appeared to be pushed out. You have to understand the layout of my apartment to fully understand our fright. The apartment was a 3rd floor attic in an old Victorian style house that was renovated into a small loft type apartment. When entering the apartment, you go up 3 flights of stairs, into the doorway, and up another 2 sets of stairs into the living room. To the right is the bathroom, and little beyond that is a crawl space in the wall that runs under the eaves of the house and behind the bathroom and bathtub. Alec and I bickered about who was going to go into the crawl space. Needless to say, we waited until Eric came home about 2 hours later. We told him what had happened and insisted that he go into the crawl space to investigate. When he got to the space behind the bathtub, he discovered a lot of debris, which included dark old stained ropes and large J hooks. I insisted that he just leave them alone, and figured where the house was so old, they must have been left behind during renovation or construction. We had our landlord fix the tiles, and continued with our daily lives, even though I was permanently left with a feeling of unease. For about 6 or 7 months nothing happened. On Christmas Eve of 1975, we had a tray set up in front of the crawl space door, which was approximately 2 inches wide by 3.5 high. The door fell open, knocking over the tree and smashing all of my Christmas ornaments. Eric jumped out of bed and stopped suddenly. We both heard a strange sound coming from the living room. It seemed to be coming from the crawl space. At the same time, I saw a strange mist or fog hovering close to the ceiling in the living room. It was a very faint, almost like thin smoke. I pointed it out to Eric, but it vanished before he could see it. I still can't believe how calm I stayed throughout this whole episode. When Alec and his new wife Vanessa came by on Christmas morning, we told them the whole story. Vanessa was a very spiritual person and became instantly spooked before we even told her the story. Alec commented on how strange she was acting before she entered the apartment. She lost all the color in her face and seemed aloof. She mentioned that something didn't feel right about my apartment. I really started to feel like it was time to start looking for a new place to live. Eric had to leave the following week for a business trip to California. He would be gone for almost 3 months. I asked my girlfriend Samantha to stay with me for a while. I did not want to be alone. Samantha knew what had been happening and agreed reluctantly to stay on the sofa in the living room. The first month and a half was pretty much uneventful, so Sam and I began to look at new apartments. I started feeling confident, and then nothing was going to happen. I was wrong. Samantha had to go back home for a few days, so I was alone. I'd gone out with Alec and Vanessa on a Saturday night, and came home at about 1 a.m. I climbed into bed with a book. I must have fallen asleep while reading. Do you ever get that feeling that someone is near you? I woke up on my stomach, and I could sense somebody walking around my bed. I laid still and waited for it to pass. I heard the floorboards creaking, and I felt a cool breeze pass over me. I finally turned over and looked into the living room and saw the mist moving towards the crawlspace floor. The absolute fear that I felt paralyzed me. I could do nothing but stare and hope that nothing would happen. The strange noises started again. I can only describe the noise as a clang or knives being sharpened. I lost all of my composure. I ran out of my apartment wearing only my nightshirt and grabbed my car keys on the way out of the door. I drove to Alex and spent the night. I called Eric in LA and explained what happened and that I would not go back until he came home. I paid the rent. There was no way I was going to stay there alone. Eric came home on April 7th. I told him Alec and I would pick him up from the airport, and then we would go to the apartment and get our belongings. I will never forget what we saw when we went back. It made me a true believer in the paranormal. I still don't know to this day what was haunting that apartment, but I truly believe it was evil. We walked into the apartment to discover the rug torn up, almost gouged up in the living room. All the tiles in the bathroom enclosure were punched out into the tub. The bedroom truly horrified the three of us. It appeared that something mauled the bed linens. The mirror that we had was smashed as well as my lamps. We grabbed what we could salvage and started to leave when we nosed the rope and J-hook through the kitchen table. I don't know if a person came in and did all the damage, but nothing explains the J-hook and the rope. My landlord insisted that no one had access to the apartment since we had moved in. We left that day and never looked back. I did some research on the house, but found nothing significant that would explain any of the occurrences while we lived there. Eric and I now live in Vermont with our 3 kids. The house was renovated and turned into a retail store. We have not told them the story, and I don't think we ever will. I've been tempted to write what happened to my family many times, but it seems far too unreal. We were not allowed to talk about this out of the house when I was a child, and my mother only told our house guests about our visitors when they experienced something in our house. Our childhood home was built in 1898. My parents bought the house in 1974 when I was only 6 months old. The house was very large and had been converted into a double. My grandmother moved into the upper level. Strange things began to happen shortly after my family moved in. My mother had her first experience one night after she sent my older sisters to bed. From her bedroom door, she could look out and see into the kitchen's hallway and into the bathroom. My family had only lived in the house less than a month when my mom saw a little blonde-haired girl walk into the bathroom. All of my sisters have very dark brown hair, and this was clearly a blonde-haired child. My mother panicked and yelled to the little girl, but the door shut. My mom jumped out of bed. In her mind, she was thinking that this little girl was a neighbor's child that my sisters must have snuck in the house. When she opened the door, there was nobody inside the room. My mother nicknamed the little girl Jessie, and I have no idea why. My mother had many experiences in the house and with the younger children, myself, my younger sister, and younger brother. When we were very small, it was as if we were playing with someone else. I don't remember this particular incident, but my mom did. But I do remember that in my oldest sister's bedroom in her closet, there was a paneled off section that led under our hallway steps to the second floor. I remember talking to someone that we called the lady under the stairs. I always thought that it was my mom or grandmother, but I later learned that that was not the case. When we told my mom about this, she would not let us play this game anymore. I do not remember being scared at all though. My younger sister and I would always go into our hallway and play with the lady on the stairs. I have very little recollection of this, and at the time, I would have been about 4 years old, and my sister would have been about 3. When we described the woman to my mother, she forbade us from being in the hallway alone. I never took the ghost stories to heart, and was very carefree as a child. I always felt safe. However, I did finally have a bizarre experience that I could not explain or rationalize away. My grandmother had a stroke when I was 15, and my mother gave my older sister's bedroom to my grandmother since it was on the first level and safer for her. She had no control over what she was saying and was rapidly deteriorating. My parents did not lay any ground rules for us kids that summer, as things were in havoc, and my brother and I had stayed up all night watching Nick at Night in the living room. I could see into my grandmother's room, and we also kept an eye out for her should she use the bathroom or want something to drink. I was just starting to doze off when I thought I saw someone in my grandmother's room. It was a blonde-haired girl who might have been 10 to 12. I have no idea the age. I thought I was just seeing things, or that I was really wiped out, and my mom's stories were starting to get to me. I walked out into our kitchen, and my oldest sister was eating a sandwich, and I told her what I saw. She laughed at me and told me I must have been dreaming. I thought maybe she was right, because I just never believed what my mom had been saying about the girl she had claimed seeing on several occasions. Now here's where I realized I was not a complete nutcase. I said before that the house was very big. Well, my grandmother started screaming, and my sister and I ran into the room. My grandmother was up and headed for the front door. She was screaming about fire and the little girl. We could barely make out what she was talking about, but she kept repeating the little girl said I was going to hurt the baby, and I have to go before I cause a fire. That was the most intelligible sentence that my grandma had said in over a month. My sister kept saying, "What little girl?" And my grandmother said clear as day, "The little blonde-haired girl." My grandmother was 72 years old and short of hearing. She was also 3 rooms away when I literally whispered this to my sister. We woke up my mom because we did not know what to do. My grandmother ran out of the house and refused to come back in. She stood on her porch. My parents took her to the hospital, and she was placed in a nursing home because even the mention of our house sent her into hysterics. The baby she was talking about is my younger brother, who is the baby in the family. My mom decided to turn the house into a one-family home again, and had us kids, there were 6 of us, do the work. We did not mind, as we wanted to help, and it was a good way for us not to think about my grandmother all the time. My younger sister and I would be the only 2 sharing a room, but that was fine with me, as we were very close, and we were excited. Again I was up, and could not sleep, so I went up to the room that would be ours. It had been my grandmother's, and I was scraping wallpaper off the walls with a putty knife. We had started this project the night before, and I was bored, so I went up to get some work done. I was scraping the walls and had been doing so for about a half an hour, when I heard a funny noise sounding like the scraping noise I was making with the knife, but different. It's hard to explain. I thought someone was playing a trick on me, so I began to scrape the wall, and very quickly I stopped. However, the sound that I heard continued, and it was the sound of scraping, but it was coming from across the room. I don't know if whatever was in the room was mocking me or playing a game, but the scraping kept going on. Whoever or whatever did not care that I heard them. I screamed. I thought it was one of my older sisters. I ran down the front stairs and opened the door, and the house was completely quiet. Everyone was sound asleep, snoring. I woke up everyone in the house. I was terrified, and I never slept in that room. I would hear things in the house until I was 18 and moved out. As for our house restorations, my mother began working on the kitchen and back hallway that led to our attic. While doing so, she found where the house had burn marks and was scorched. My mother mentioned this to one of our neighbors, a woman who had lived on our street from the day she was born. In the early 1920s, our house had burnt very badly and had been rebuilt. At that time, it had been converted into a double. A little girl and her parents lost their lives in the fire. My other sisters had things happen to them too. One of my older sisters was looking out of the living room windows. Something grabbed her shoulder and called her name. One more thing. Please don't think I'm nuts, but I have not had this happen in any house or apartment I've lived in since. And one thing I did notice was that whatever was in the house was not frightening to me in my youth, but only became frightening when each of us hit a certain age. Why? I have no idea. This was also something I thought that was weird. This little girl was never visible upstairs, and the woman only was spotted downstairs once. The neighbor who was alive when the house caught on fire remembered that the little girl's name was Jessica. My mom had been calling her that for years, and had never known what the little girl's real name was, but had just called her that because it seemed right. I've been reading the stories on your site for a while now, and decided to share experience of my own. I'm afraid it's not particularly exciting or dramatic, but I feel it's a good example of the attitude you need to take when dealing with spirits. I've been told on more than one occasion, by people who claim psychic abilities, that there are spirits present in my house. This really comes as no huge shock, is the core of the house is a farmhouse that is over 120 years old. Although I've never seen a ghost myself, I'm familiar with the sort of chilled feeling that people describe when they are in the presence of spirits. It is not truly the same feeling as normal reaction to temperature, but something that seems more internal and comes and goes independently of environmental changes. I've very commonly experienced this sensation, usually beginning before someone else remarks about their perception of something otherworldly. Several years ago, one summer morning, I'd come home in the early morning from working the night shift. I was getting undressed for bed and placed my bedroom door in a 3/4 closed position that I usually keep in to provide some cross ventilation. Let me explain that my bedroom is a rectangular room, approximately 10 foot wide by 16 feet long. There's a set of double windows on the far end of the room. My bed is crossways in front of the windows with the head on the longer wall. The door was on the other end of the room, and due to irregularities from different additions to the house, there was an approximate 4-inch step down when entering the room from the hallway. At the time of this incident, there was no central air in the house, so the only cooling method was to open windows. As I was getting ready for bed, I saw the door swing shut rather firmly from the 3/4 position. At first, I dismissed this as just being the breeze, as I was feeling a slightly chilled feeling on what was a rather warm morning, even though I didn't really notice much in the way of the air current. I was very tired and somewhat groggy, and only wished to get to bed as soon as possible. I put my door back into the position I had it in, and went back to getting ready for bed. Almost immediately, the door swung shut again very firmly. Even though I really did not notice the breeze, the door swung quite freely on its hinges, and I did not think much of the fact that it kept shutting. I then took one of my work boots, the common style most everyone is familiar with that laces up about 9 inches above the ankle, and placed it with the toe section underneath the door and the heel towards the doorway, and repositioned the door to the 3/4 position I wanted it to be in. Moments later, the door dragged the boot across the carpeted floor and closed as far as it could with the boot in the way. Now at that point, I realized that there was certainly no breeze present that could exert that amount of force, and the chill I was experiencing was not the normal environmental kind, nor was it in any way cold enough that morning for me to be experiencing a normal chill. Now, I'm not a person who likes to have his sleep interfered with, nor do I particularly like to have my plans of any kind thwarted. Besides, all of my reading and conversations regarding the supernatural and hauntings have always indicated that you have to assert your rights to control your domain when challenged by spirits. With this in mind, I grabbed up a heavy, approximately 12-pound Thor hammer I'd cast from aluminum years before in shop class, and placed the head of it underneath the door, with the handle sticking up between the door and the doorway. Stepping back, I then witnessed the door drag this heavy hammer, approximately 12 pounds, across the floor the same way I had my boot, until again, the door was as far shut as it could be without actually removing the hammer from underneath it. At that point, becoming somewhat angry, I took the hammer out from underneath the door, placed the door into a 2/3 closed position, slightly more open than I really wanted, and waited. Within seconds, the door started to shut again. At this point, I pointed at the door and said loudly and firmly, "No." The door stopped moving and stayed perfectly still. I stood there for a few moments longer watching the door, and it did not move again. I then said thank you and went on to bed. I think it's important for people to understand that in most cases of encountering a spirit in your home, you simply have to assert your right to be the master of your home. I can't promise that it will always be the complete answer in all cases, but I believe it to be the best way to begin with dealing with a disagreement with a spirit in your home. Many years ago, my family and I lived in a lovely Queen Anne-style home. We lived in it for 13 years, 11 of which we experienced paranormal phenomena. 2 years after we moved in, we had our first of many odd occurrences. My daughter was in the kitchen and I was upstairs when I heard her call out that the upstairs toilet must have overflowed because water was running down the outside of the staircase. I ran to the top of the stairs in bare feet, only to feel water on the surface of the carpeting. I looked over the top of the railing to assure that the toilet hadn't overflowed, and that was when I felt the wetness on my feet, but there were no water pipes in that part of the house. When I got down the stairs, I found water running in rivulets down the wooden molding. My daughter reached up to turn on the light under the stairway alcove, and as soon as she did, the water stopped. We had to wipe the trom down, and we never found any reason for that activity. Months later, while preparing for bed one night, I heard footsteps running down the attic stairs. The door crashed against the opposite wall, and then nothing. I was terrified thinking that someone was there. They would have to pass my room to get downstairs, but nothing happened. When we finally went to look, the door was against the wall. We even thought that maybe a ball had bounced down the stairs, sounding like footsteps, but there was nothing. Strangely, when we started to think our house had unseen guests, we were no longer frightened. As time passed, we had many more experiences. I heard a woman crying softly but pitifully. Two of my daughters saw images of old-fashioned children dressed in long white nightgowns and mob caps. A visitor to my house saw the same thing and asked me who the little girl was. On another occasion, my nephew was spending the night and thought he saw me standing at the top of the stairs in a long white old-fashioned nightgown, and then supposedly I went down the stairs and didn't come back. My nephew was 16 at the time, and we hadn't told him about the house. My husband thought we were all crazy because he didn't believe in this sort of thing. My daughter came home late one night and was just lying in bed, going over her evening, and looked up to see a male figure suspended over the bed, and as she watched the image dissolve from the bottom up, as if it were sand falling. There were other things that happened there, although nothing dangerous, and finally, we sold the house and moved on. It was several years after we moved from the house that we met a family that had lived there years before we did and had very similar things happen to them, but they said their experiences were very frightening and mean-spirited. I sometimes think our guests moved in with us because from time to time, we still get very strange sensations in our present Victorian home. This is my own personal ghost story. This happened when I was about 12 years old, so keep in mind that 12 years have passed, but as long as I live, I will never forget the details. Here goes. I was spending the night with a good friend of mine, in a house that was extremely haunted. Stephanie lived in one of those houses that just seemed to be the epicenter of paranormal activity. Her aunt walked the basement steps, an unknown spirit lived in the attic, and there was a tree out back that just looking at it scared me to death. I'm really not entirely sure why the tree scared me so much, but it rocked me to the bone. It was large and had an ominous presence. Stephanie called it the witch tree, but really had no actual reason for doing so. But nevertheless, the tree is not my focus in the story. It just gives a little background information. We went to sleep that night, and about 2 a.m., I woke up with a start. I thought it was just because Steph and I had talked about ghost stories until we fell asleep, but then I had the feeling that I was being watched. I looked up and saw this large pair of blue eyes hovering over me. I know this sounds silly, but I'm dead serious. They just kept watching me. Maybe watching me is not the right word. They kept glaring at me, and all I could sense was evil. I felt so cold, and I couldn't wake Stephanie up. I thought I might have been dreaming, so I closed my eyes and laid there. I looked up every few minutes and the eyes were still there. I had no clue what to do to make them go away, so I just started praying to God, something I saw in a movie, and never opened my eyes that night again. I woke up in the morning and told Stephanie about them. She had never seen them before, but didn't doubt me. She of all people knew the history of her house. I went on with life as normal, forgetting about the eyes until about 2 months later, Stephanie came to me and said she talked with her little brother Aaron, who was 8. She said she didn't even mention the eyes to him, but one night they were talking about the house and he asked her if he had ever seen a large pair of blue eyes. She stopped dead in her tracks. Aaron said that to him the eyes were friendly and never glared at him. We just figured out that they saw me as a stranger and focused evil on me. I will never know for certain. All I know is that I never stayed in that house again. In addition to that story, my sister and I were out driving about 9 months ago. It was about 11 p.m. and we passed by Stephanie's old house. She no longer lived there, but I'm pretty sure that her father still did. I turned to Lauren, my sister, and said, "Look, La, there's that creepy house." Now, this next part will sound so bizarre, but I swear it is true. All of a sudden, a light shot up from the house, which was completely dark, and two other lights shot up from the other side of the road. We thought they might just be electrical charges. That was, of course, until they started chasing the car. We had to get the mail down the road until they disappeared. Do you have any idea what those lights might have been? Thank you for listening to my stories. Back in 1996, my Uncle Wayne passed away in a tragic auto accident on the interstate near Neenah, Wisconsin, between Appleton and Oshkosh. He had been pulling a load of sod with a small pickup truck that he borrowed from a coworker. The truck must have been too small to carry the load because the truck flip killed my uncle instantly. Needless to say, my father flew out to Wisconsin from our home in Pensacola, Florida, to attend the funeral of my youngest brother. My father is the oldest of 7 children. The story I'm about to tell comes from the mouth of my father. The afternoon before the day of the funeral, my father took his mother and father to the funeral parlor to finalize the arrangements. On the way back to my grandparents' home, my grandmother noticed that her family ring was missing a stone. The stone that was missing was my Uncle Wayne's birthstone. They looked everywhere for the stone and could not find it. Everyone kept saying it was Wayne's way of saying a final goodbye to his mother. The next day, the day of the funeral, everyone left my grandparents' house to go to the funeral except my Uncle Stan. Stan stayed behind to wait for that cousin that was running late. A few minutes later, Stan heard a car pull into the driveway. At the bottom of the driveway was a car that looked exactly like Wayne's, a green Spitfire. My Uncle Stan thought how strange it was that their cousin had a car exactly like Wayne's. His car was still parked outside his old apartment at the time. He looked out the window again and saw a man sitting in the driver's seat with a beard. My Uncle Wayne had a beard when he died. My Uncle Stan opened the door to walk outside, thinking it was their cousin, who also has a beard. When he opened the door, the car reversed out of the driveway and quickly drove away. A few minutes later, their cousins pulled up in a totally different car. My Uncle Stan was so shocked that he told everyone at the funeral about what happened. Since this time, no one else had been visited by my Uncle Wayne. A year ago, we bought an old Victorian house. The family matriarch had refused to let it be sold, although it was in a dismal condition. When she passed away, the family decided to sell, although it had been with them for 80 years. We began the serious process of renovation, but I was disturbed by the obvious presence of an old woman, dressed in pink, always in the same place, in the same room. I naturally assumed it was the family matriarch, Sophia. She was so unhappy and seemed displeased at the disturbance we were causing, so I called in a psychic friend of mine to help her move along. The psychic rang bells, chanted, burned, and we put lit candles in all the doorways and windows. The very next day, it appeared that Sophia had gracefully moved on. A year passed. We finished the renovation and were preparing to throw an open house party. The day before the party, a woman came into the house and announced that she had grown up there. She said she had been coming by to check on her progress, but had always been shy to come in. Something had drawn her courage up to come in on that day. We were very pleased and immediately invited her and her family to come to the open house the very next day. They all came. At one point, I couldn't resist, and I asked this woman if there had ever been ghosts in the house. "Oh yes," she replied. "My great-grandmother was so persistent, we had to call in a priest to exorcise her." Feeling confident, I then told her about Sophia. The woman began to tremble and cry. She said that her mother, Sophia, had always worn pink, and the room and place I described would have been between the beds in the children's room. Rest in peace, Sophia. Years ago, before I was born, my father was sleeping at the head of the bed, I believe, and my mother was at the foot by the window as there was no air conditioning, and the light was out, room dark. Well, My mother said all of a sudden, she heard what she believed to be a woman at the head of the bed, jabbering away, could not understand her at all. My mother got terrified and pulled the cover up over her head, and when she did, this thing came right by her ear and just talked. She was unable to make out what the thing was saying. She jumped up and yelled and slept for a week with the ceiling light on. She asked, and someone told her that they believed the house we used to live in had been moved from another location. Another true story. My mom used to walk me to grade school about 6 blocks from the house, and she lost her house keys one day. Well, she traced her steps, even looked by the mailbox at the corner of her house, thinking that she laid them there. No keys. We lived upstairs, 16 feet up, and my dad was in front of the bedroom, and my mom was in my room, laying next to me, and the strangest thing happened. All of a sudden, I had the most peaceful feeling. This is a feeling that's kind of hard to explain, but I'll do my best. So, someone I don't know. It could have been an angel or a dead relative. Who knows? But it was right next to the bed on my side and said my name. I was not scared at all, but my mom heard it too and jumped up. I had so many questions, such as who are you? What are you doing? And how do you know me? But at the moment, the phone rang, and Sandy, who lived around the corner, was walking home from church on a Sunday and said, "I found your keys. They were by the mailbox." I know this writing is all over the place, and I'm so sorry if this was hard to understand, but I think you guys got the gist of it. These things I can't explain are occurrences of the afterlife, in my opinion. Phantom of Darkness invites you to share a credible movie of epic proportions. Phantom of Darkness in. Share the video, subscribe, comment, and like. It's fun for the whole family. Hey guys, that was a really terrible trailer that I just sent to you guys. I don't know what that means. Sending it to you, transmitting it through your airwaves so you can listen to it. Who cares? This is only one take, so I'm going to do my best to do it. But anyway, guys, hope you really enjoyed this compilation. I know you guys don't really like compilation. I'm just kidding. You guys love it. But I know I'm not really the biggest fan of compilations, but I'm going to do that once a month, and I know you guys are going to appreciate it. So that's what I'm doing for you guys, just for you guys, because I love you guys, and I want to make sure that you guys are getting the best content ever. So once a month, I'm going to roll out these compilations so we can examine the best stories that I've done over the course of the last month. So February, here we come. We're going to have some great stories in store for you guys, and we're going to not stutter. Haha, I'm just kidding. I'm not promising you anything like that. I'm going to always stutter because I'm not perfect, and even my cat's not perfect. Actually, he told me he's perfect. And I was just kidding. I'm going to put another edit in there because I couldn't possibly do something without editing it. Because you know who I am. I don't know what I'm trying to say, guys. But seriously, guys, thank you so much. I'm getting so close to 10K subscribers, and it's not just the number that's important to me. It's the fact that I love you guys, and I said that over and over again, but I can never be too thankful for you guys. You guys are the reason why my channel even exists. Like, seriously, guys, you're the ones who have to share it. You're the ones who leave the comments. You're the ones who have to make sure that this video gets to as many people as possible. And it's not my doing. I can't have any control over that, It's up to you guys. So the fact that you guys are sharing, the fact that you guys are commenting, the fact that you guys are making sure that I don't stutter, even though that's unsuccessful because I stutter anyways, it just really means a lot to me, guys. But seriously, guys, even with my nonsensical humor and whatnot, of course, I do all the hard work, but you guys do a lot of hard work too. So that's why I keep saying thank you. That's why I keep putting out these videos, because I know it's not just me that's doing this. It's a team effort, and you guys are a part of the team. But with that, guys, I'm going to go, and I'll see you in the next video. So good night, good morning, and I'll see you in the next video. Love you as always, and I'm never going to stop saying thank you, because I understand what you guys mean to me. I understand, so it's no big deal. I just love you guys, like a big moon over a pie. What the hell? Okay, I really need to get going, or else I'll sound like a freaking deviant person who doesn't understand things. That doesn't even make sense either. Okay, guys, bye. I love you.